Maya had always loved the sound of rain on her grandmother's old roof. But this wasn't the gentle patter she remembered from childhood. This was different, angry. The drops hit the windows like tiny hammers, and the wind howled through the trees. With a voice she'd never heard before, she stood in her kitchen, watching the local news on her laptop while her coffee grew cold. The weatherman's face was serious, more serious than she'd ever seen him. "Residents along Riverside Drive should evacuate immediately," he was saying. "This is not a drill. The river is expected to rise 15 feet above normal levels." Maya looked out her window at the street below. Cars were already moving slowly through ankle-deep water. Her neighbors, the Johnsons, were loading suitcases into their truck. Old Mr. Peterson from next door was struggling to carry his cat carrier to his car. Everyone was leaving, but Maya couldn't leave. Not yet. She walked upstairs to her grandmother's bedroom, now converted into her home office. The walls were covered with family photos, her grandmother's paintings, and certificates from her community garden work. Her grandmother had lived in this house for 60 years. She'd raised 5 children here, hosted countless family dinners, and had always said this house was built to last. "It's survived worse storms than this," Maya said to herself, running her fingers along the old wooden dresser. But deep down, she knew this storm was different. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. "Maya, please leave. Come stay with us. The kids are worried about you." Maya typed back, "I'm fine. House is solid, just keeping an eye on things." But she wasn't fine. She was scared. The water outside was rising faster than anyone had predicted. What started as puddles in the morning had become streams by noon. Now, at 3 in the afternoon, the street looked more like a river. Her 3 cats, Whiskers, Patches, and Luna, seemed to sense something was wrong. They'd been following her around all day, meowing more than usual. Luna, the youngest, had refused to leave her side at all. "I know, girl," Maya said, scratching behind Luna's ears. "It's scary, but we're safe up here." The power flickered. Maya held her breath, but the lights came back on. She'd charged all her devices and filled the bathtub with water, just in case. Her grandmother had taught her to always be prepared. "Hope for the best, prepare for the worst," she used to say. Maya went back downstairs and made herself a sandwich. She wasn't really hungry, but she knew she should eat. Outside, the wind was getting stronger. She could hear tree branches scraping against the house. By 5 o'clock, the water had reached the bottom step of her front porch. Maya had moved everything valuable from the first floor to the second floor. Photo albums, important documents, her grandmother's jewelry box. The cats watched from the staircase, their eyes wide and alert. The street was completely underwater now. Maya could see the tops of cars poking through the surface like metal islands. A shopping cart floated by, followed by a lawn chair. It was like watching a slow-motion disaster movie, except this was real. Her phone rang. It was her boss, checking on her. "Maya, are you okay? I saw the news about the flooding." "I'm fine, Tom. Just watching the water rise. It's incredible." "You should have evacuated. It's not safe." "I know, but I couldn't leave the house." "And the cats." "I couldn't fit all 3 carriers in my car," Tom sighed. "Well, stay safe and don't worry about work. Take as much time as you need." After hanging up, Maya felt more alone than ever. The house felt too quiet despite the storm raging outside. She turned on the radio for company. The emergency broadcast was playing on repeat. "Seek higher ground immediately. Do not attempt to drive through flooded areas. If you are trapped, stay where you are and wait for rescue." She was definitely trapped now. The water was halfway up her front door. Her car was completely submerged. There was no way out except to wait. Maya made herself comfortable on the couch with her laptop and tried to work. But every few minutes, she'd look out the window to check the water level. It just kept rising. Around 7 o'clock, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. It was a loud crack, like a tree falling. She rushed to the window and saw that the big oak tree in the Johnsons' yard had split in half. One half was still standing, but the other half was lying across the street, its branches disappearing into the dark water. "Oh no," she whispered. If trees that size were falling, what else might happen? The rain was coming down harder now. Maya could barely see across the street. The water was so high that only the second floors of the houses across from her were visible. It looked like a neighborhood of floating rooftops. She tried calling her sister, but the call wouldn't go through. The cell towers were probably affected by the storm. The internet was still working, thankfully, so she sent a quick email letting her family know she was okay. As darkness fell, Maya felt the house shudder. It was just the wind, she told herself. The house was solid, it had stood for decades. It would survive this too, but then she heard something else. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. It was faint at first, almost lost in the wind and rain. But as she listened more carefully, she realized what it was. Someone was calling for help. Maya pressed her face to the window, trying to see through the rain and darkness. At first, she couldn't see anything, just water and floating debris. But then, in the glow of the streetlight that was somehow still working, she saw him. A man was clinging to the stop sign at the corner of her street. The water was up to his chest, and he was clearly struggling to hold on. Every few seconds, a wave would wash over him, and he'd disappear for a moment before his head popped back up. Maya's heart pounded. The man was in serious danger. If he lost his grip, the current would sweep him away, and in this flood, that would probably mean death. She opened her window and called out, "Are you okay?" The man turned toward her voice. Even through the rain, she could see the desperation in his face. "Help me," he shouted back. "I can't hold on much longer." Maya looked around frantically. What could she do? The water was too deep and too dangerous for her to go out there. But if she didn't do something, this stranger would die right in front of her house. That's when she remembered her grandmother's old clothesline rope in the basement. If she could get it to him somehow, maybe he could use it to pull himself to safety. Maya ran downstairs, her heart racing. The basement was partially flooded, but she found the rope hanging on its hook, just where her grandmother had always kept it. It was thick and strong, meant to hold heavy wet clothes in strong winds. She raced back upstairs and tied one end of the rope to the radiator near the window. Then she opened the window as wide as it would go. "I'm throwing you a rope," she called out to the man. The wind was so strong that her first throw fell short. The second throw got closer, but the man couldn't reach it while holding on to the stop sign. On the third throw, the rope landed close enough for him to grab it. Maya watched as the man slowly, carefully, began to pull himself hand over hand toward her house. The current was strong, and several times she thought he might lose his grip, but he kept going, fighting against the water and wind. It took him nearly 10 minutes to reach her house. By then, Maya had found her grandmother's old wooden stepladder and positioned it under the window. When the man finally reached the side of the house, she helped guide him to the ladder. Getting him through the window was harder than either of them expected. He was exhausted, soaked, and shaking from cold. Maya had to grab his arms and help pull him inside while he pushed with his feet against the ladder. Finally, he collapsed on her grandmother's bedroom floor, breathing heavily and dripping water everywhere. Maya stared at him, suddenly realizing what she'd done. She'd just let a complete stranger into her house. A man she'd never seen before, knew nothing about. And who could be anyone? But as she looked at him lying there, clearly grateful to be alive, she felt something her grandmother had taught her. Sometimes being human meant taking risks to help other people. Sometimes you had to trust that most people were good, even when you had no way of knowing for sure. "Thank you," the man said, his voice shaky. "You saved my life." Maya grabbed a towel from her grandmother's linen closet. "Let me get you some dry clothes," she said. "And then you can tell me how you ended up out there." As she handed him the towel, Maya had no idea that this moment would change everything. She thought she was just helping a stranger survive a flood. She had no way of knowing that this stranger would turn her quiet, simple life completely upside down. Maya stood there holding the towel, watching water drip from the stranger's clothes onto her grandmother's hardwood floor. The man was shivering so hard his teeth were chattering. His dark hair was plastered to his head, and his clothes clung to him like a second skin. "I'm David," he said, trying to smile through his shivers. "And I owe you my life." "Maya," she replied, still keeping her distance. "Let me get you some dry clothes. My grandfather's things are still in the closet." She went to her grandmother's bedroom and pulled out an old flannel shirt and a pair of jeans that had belonged to her grandfather. They'd be too big for this man, but they were dry and warm. "Here," she said, handing him the clothes through the bathroom door. "There are towels in there, too. Take your time." While David changed, Maya paced around the living room. What had she gotten herself into? She'd acted on instinct, but now reality was sinking in. She was trapped in a house with a complete stranger during a flood. No one could get to her if something went wrong. Her phone still had no signal. Her cat Luna rubbed against her legs, seeming to sense her anxiety. Maya picked her up and held her close. "What do you think, girl?" she whispered. "Did we do the right thing?" Luna just purred and nuzzled her face. David emerged from the bathroom looking much better. The clothes were indeed too big, but he'd rolled up the sleeves and pant legs. His hair was still damp, but he'd combed it back. For the first time, Maya got a good look at him. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with kind eyes and a face that seemed honest enough, but there was something else there too. A tension around his eyes, like he was worried about something beyond just the flood. "Thank you," he said again. "I can't tell you how grateful I am. I thought I was going to die out there." Maya nodded toward the couch. "Sit down. You still look shaky. Are you hurt?" David sat down heavily, like all his energy had left him. "No, just tired and cold. I was in that water for over an hour before I found that stop sign. What were you doing out there?" "Everyone was supposed to evacuate hours ago." David looked down at his hands. "I was trying to get to higher ground. My car got caught in the flood near the bridge. I tried to drive through what looked like a shallow spot, but the current was stronger than I expected. The car just got swept away." Maya studied his face. Something about his story felt off, but she couldn't put her finger on what. "Where were you coming from?" "A meeting," he said quickly. "Work stuff. Boring business meeting that ran late. I should have left earlier. But ... He shrugged. Maya went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. "I'll make some tea. You need something warm in you." While she waited for the water to boil, she watched David from the corner of her eye. He was looking around the room, taking in the family photos on the walls, her grandmother's old furniture, the stack of books on the coffee table. His eyes lingered on her laptop, which was still open on the dining table. "Nice place," he said. "Feels like a real home." "It was my grandmother's house. She passed away last year and left it to me. I'm sorry for your loss. She had good taste. Everything here feels ... genuine." Maya wasn't sure what he meant by that, but she nodded anyway. The kettle whistled, and she made 2 cups of chamomile tea. She handed one to David and sat down in the armchair across from him, keeping some distance between them. "So what do you do for work?" she asked, trying to make conversation. David hesitated for just a moment. "Real estate. Property management, mostly. What about you?" "Graphic design. I work from home." "That's convenient, especially with weather like this." They sat in awkward silence for a while, sipping their tea and listening to the storm outside. The wind was still howling, and Maya could hear things bumping against the house as they floated by in the floodwater. David kept checking his pockets as if looking for something. Finally, he pulled out a phone. It was completely soaked. "Dead?" Maya asked. "Completely. I was hoping to call my business partner, let him know I'm okay. I have a landline, but it's been out since this afternoon. Cell towers are probably down too." David nodded, but Maya noticed he looked more worried than someone who just wanted to check in with work. There was something anxious about the way he kept glancing toward the windows, as if he was expecting something or someone. "Are you married?" Maya asked, partly to make conversation and partly because she was curious about what kind of person he was. "Divorced," he said simply. "No kids, just me and my work, I guess. That must be lonely." David looked at her with surprise, as if no one had ever suggested that his life might be lonely. I stay busy. Don't really have time to think about it. Maya felt a little sorry for him then. Despite her suspicions, there was something sad about this man. He seemed like someone who had built walls around himself. What about you? He asked. Married? Kids? Neither. I moved here to take care of my grandmother in her last years. After she passed, I just stayed. I love this house, this neighborhood. It feels like home. Even with floods like this? Maya looked out the window at the submerged street. This is the worst it's ever been. Usually the river stays in its banks. I've never seen anything like this. David was quiet for a moment, staring into his tea. Climate change is making everything worse. Storms are stronger, flooding is more severe. It's going to get worse before it gets better. You seem to know a lot about it. You pick things up in my line of work? Real estate, you know. You have to think about environmental factors when you're dealing with properties. Maya nodded, but something still felt off about his answers. They were too vague, too careful. Like he was being cautious about what he said around 9 o'clock. They heard a loud crash from outside. Maya ran to the window and saw that another tree had fallen, this one blocking the street completely. Even when the water went down, it would be hard for rescue vehicles to get through. It looks like we're stuck. Here for a while, she said. David joined her at the window. I'm sorry about this. I know having a stranger in your house isn't what you planned. It's not your fault. You didn't ask for your car to get swept away? But as Maya said it, she wondered if that was really true. Something about David's story just didn't add up. Who drove toward a flood zone during an evacuation? What kind of business meeting was so important that he'd risk his life for it? And then there was the way he kept looking at his dead phone, like he was desperate to make a call, the way he tensed up whenever he heard a sound outside. The expensive watch on his wrist that he kept checking, even though the face was fogged with water. Maya made them sandwiches for dinner, using up some of the food that would go bad if the power went out. They ate mostly in silence, the storm providing a constant soundtrack of wind and rain. I should probably sleep on the couch, David said when they finished eating. I don't want to impose any more than I already have. There's a guest room upstairs. It's small, but it has a bed. Are you sure? I don't want to make you uncomfortable. Maya looked at him. Despite her doubts about his story, he seemed genuinely concerned about her comfort. And she had to admit, having someone else in the house made her feel safer during the storm. It's fine. Just for tonight. Tomorrow, hopefully the water will start going down and we can figure out how to get you out of here. David smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Thank you, Ma. Really, you're being incredibly kind to someone you don't even know. My grandmother always said that's how you tell what kind of person someone is, how they treat strangers. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. As Maya showed David to the guest room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. There was more to this man than he was telling her, but what choice did she have? The flood had brought him to her door, and she couldn't exactly throw him back out into the storm. She gave him extra blankets and towels, then went to her own room. As she got ready for bed, she could hear David moving around in the guest room. Through the thin walls, she heard him talking quietly to himself, but she couldn't make out the words. Maya lay in bed listening to the storm and thinking about the strange turn her day had taken. This morning, her biggest worry had been whether her internet would stay on so she could work. Now she was sharing her house with a mysterious stranger, who might not be telling her the whole truth, but as she drifted off to sleep, Maya realized something else. For the first time in months, she didn't feel alone in the house. Despite everything, despite her doubts and fears, there was something comforting about having another person nearby. She just hoped she wouldn't regret that feeling in the morning. Maya woke up to the sound of David's voice. At first, she thought he was talking to her, but as she listened more carefully, she realized he was on the phone. Somehow, he'd gotten his phone working. She checked her clock. It was barely 6 in the morning. The storm had calmed down during the night, but she could still hear rain pattering against the windows. More importantly, she could hear David's conversation through the thin walls. I know, he was saying in a hushed voice. The meeting was a disaster. Everything went wrong. Maya sat up in bed, trying to hear more without making noise. No, I couldn't get there in time. The flood caught me on Riverside Drive. I'm stuck at some woman's house? Some woman's house? Maya felt a flash of irritation. After she'd saved his life, that's how he described her. Listen, we need to handle this carefully. If the media gets hold of this story, we're finished. The lawsuits will destroy us. Lawsuits? Maya's heart started beating faster. What kind of real estate work involved lawsuits and media attention? I don't care what it costs. Find a way to make this go away. Pay whoever you have to pay. David's voice was getting more agitated. Maya could hear him pacing around the small guest room. The environmental reports were supposed to be buried. How did they get out? Who leaked them? Environmental reports? Maya's mind raced. What was David really involved in? Look, I'll handle the PR when I get back. Just make sure our lawyers are ready. And for God's sake, keep the press away from the Riverside Drive area. If they start asking questions about the flooding patterns, Maya's blood ran cold. Riverside Drive, her street. What did David's work have to do with her neighborhood? She heard David end the call and start moving around the room. Maya quickly lay back down and pretended to be asleep. A few minutes later, she heard him go downstairs. Maya got dressed quickly and quietly. She needed to find out what David was really up to. She tiptoed downstairs and found him in the kitchen, making coffee with the supplies she'd shown him the night before. Good morning, he said, with a smile that now seemed fake to her. I hope I didn't wake you. No, I was already up. The storm kept me awake. It's much calmer now. Maybe the water will start going down today. Maya poured herself coffee and sat at the kitchen table. Were you able to get your phone working? David hesitated for just a moment. Yeah, I dried it out with some rice I found in your pantry. I hope that's okay. Of course. Did you reach your business partner? Briefly, just to let him know I'm safe. Maya nodded, but she knew he was lying. That conversation had been about much more than just checking in. It had been about covering something up, something that involved lawsuits and environmental reports, and her own neighborhood. David, can I ask you something? Sure. What exactly do you do in real estate? You mentioned property management yesterday, but that was a pretty intense phone call for property management. David's face went pale. You heard that? The walls are thin. I couldn't help but overhear. David set down his coffee cup and rubbed his forehead. It's complicated. I've got time. We're not going anywhere until this water goes down. David looked out the window at the flooded street. Maya could see him thinking, trying to decide what to tell her. I'm a developer, he said finally. I buy properties and develop them, build new housing, commercial spaces, that kind of thing. And the lawsuits. There are always lawsuits in development. People complain about everything. Noise, traffic, environmental concerns. Most of it is just people trying to stop progress. Maya didn't believe him. The conversations she'd overheard sounded like much more than routine complaints. What about the environmental reports you mentioned? David's face got even paler. You really did hear everything, didn't you? I heard enough. David, what's going on? What does your work have to do with this flooding? David stood up and walked to the window. For a long moment, he just stared out at the water covering her street. You really want to know? He said finally, yes. David turned around and looked at her. My company has been buying properties along the river. We're planning a big development project. Luxury condos, retail spaces, restaurants. It's going to transform this whole area. Maya felt her stomach drop. You're talking about gentrification, pushing out the families who've lived here for generations. I'm talking about progress, about bringing jobs and investment to a neighborhood that needs it. This neighborhood doesn't need luxury condos. It needs affordable housing and support for the families who already live here. David sat back down. Look, I know how it sounds, but these developments bring tax revenue, create jobs, improve property values for everyone, and the environmental reports. David was quiet for a long time. Maya could see him struggling with whether to tell her the truth. The river used to flood differently, he said finally. There were natural wetlands that absorbed excess water during storms. Our development required filling in some of those wetlands. Maya stared at him. You're saying your company made the flooding worse? Not intentionally. We followed all the regulations. We had studies done. But you knew it might cause problems. There were some concerns raised. But the study said the risk was minimal. Maya stood up, anger building in her chest. Minimal risk? David, look outside. This whole neighborhood is underwater. Cars are floating down the street. People could have died. I know how it looks. This isn't about how it looks. This is about what you did. David ran his hands through his hair. Maya, you have to understand. I'm not the only one involved in this. There are investors, city officials, contractors. It's a huge project with a lot of moving parts. And a lot of money, yes, a lot of money. Maya paced around the kitchen. That's why you were so desperate to get to that meeting yesterday. You were trying to do damage control. The story leaked to the press. Some environmental group got hold of our impact studies. They're claiming we knew the development would increase flood risk and built anyway. Did you? David looked at her with pain in his eyes. The studies showed there was some increased risk. But we took precautions. We built flood barriers, improved drainage systems, obviously not enough. No, not enough. Maya sat back down, trying to process everything. The man she'd saved, the man sleeping in her guest room, was part of the reason her neighborhood was underwater. How many properties have you bought? She asked. About 30 so far. We're planning to buy 50 more. Including houses on this street? David nodded. We made offers on several properties on Riverside Drive, including this one. Maya felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. You made an offer on my house? Not to you directly. To your grandmother? Before she passed away, she turned us down. Good for her. Maya, I want you to know that I had no idea this was your house when you pulled me out of that water. I didn't even recognize the address until this morning. Maya didn't know what to say. She felt betrayed, even though she knew David hadn't lied to her on purpose. But he had lied about other things. What were you really doing on Riverside Drive? Yesterday? She asked. I was coming to look at properties. We'd heard that some homeowners might be willing to sell after the flood. I know how that sounds, but it's business. It sounds like you were coming to take advantage of people's misfortune. That's not how I see it. We're offering fair market value for properties that might be damaged by flooding. Fair market value for flood-damaged properties isn't fair at all. David looked miserable. I know how it all sounds. But Maya, I want you to understand something. When I was out there in that water, when I thought I was going to die, I wasn't thinking about business or development or profit. I was thinking about my life, about what I'd done with it, about whether any of it mattered. And what did you decide? I decided that maybe I've been focusing on the wrong things. Maya looked at him. Despite everything, despite her anger and disappointment, she could see that David was genuinely troubled by what he'd told her. The phone call this morning, she said. You were trying to cover this up. I was trying to protect the company, but also trying to figure out how to make things right. How do you make flooding right? I don't know, but I want to try. Maya stood up and looked out the window. The water was starting to go down, but slowly. It would be hours before anyone could get through the street. David, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything else you haven't told me? David thought for a moment. There's one more thing. The reason I was so desperate to get to that meeting yesterday, the environmental group that leaked our studies, they're planning to file a lawsuit. They want to stop the development and hold us responsible for the flooding damage. And you were going to try to stop them? I was going to try to reach a settlement. Offer them money to drop the lawsuit. Maya shook her head. You were going to pay them to keep quiet about what you did. I was going to try to find a solution that worked for everyone. Everyone except the people who live in this neighborhood. David didn't have an answer for that. Maya sat back down and looked at this man she'd saved from drowning. 24 hours ago, she'd thought he was just an unlucky stranger caught in a flood. Now she knew he was part of the reason the flood had been so devastating, but she also knew something else. David seemed genuinely remorseful about what had happened. And more importantly, he seemed willing to try to make things right. David stared at Maya's question hanging in the air between them. What was he going to do about it? He'd been asking himself the same thing for months, but now, sitting in this house with this woman who'd saved his life, the question felt more urgent than ever. I don't know, he said honestly. I've been trying to figure that out for a while now. Maya studied his face. What do you mean? David got up and walked to the window. The water was definitely going down now, but the street still looked like a river. This isn't the first time I've had doubts about what we're doing. But yesterday, when I was out there in that water, something clicked. I realized that all the money in the world doesn't mean anything if you can't look at yourself in the mirror. When did you first start having doubts? David turned back to her. About 6 months ago. We were meeting with city planners about the drainage systems. One of the engineers kept asking questions about what would happen during a major flood. My business partner kept brushing off his concerns, saying we'd deal with problems if they came up. But you were worried? I was. I went back and read all the environmental impact studies myself. Really read them, not just the executive summaries. The risk was there, buried in technical language and probability charts. But it was there. Maya felt her anger cooling slightly. At least David had been paying attention, even if he hadn't acted on his concerns. So why didn't you stop the project? David sat back down and put his head in his hands. Because I'm a coward. Because I had millions of dollars invested. Because I told myself that the experts knew what they were doing. And because you wanted to get rich. Yes, that too. Maya appreciated his honesty, even if she didn't like what he was saying. But it's more complicated than that, David continued. I grew up poor, Maya, really poor. My mom worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. I swore I'd never be that helpless again. Making money became like an addiction. I couldn't stop, even when I knew I had enough. So you decided other? People could pay the price for your security. I didn't think about it that way at the time. I told myself we were improving the neighborhood, bringing opportunities. For people who could afford luxury condos? Yes, Maya got up and made more coffee. She needed something to do with her hands while she processed everything David was telling her. Tell me about your business partner, she said. David's face darkened. Bradley Sean, he's the one who started the company. I joined him 5 years ago when I had some money to invest. Bradley is. He's very focused on profit. He doesn't worry about the things that keep me up at night, like flooding, like anything that might slow down a project or reduce profits. Bradley says I think too much, that I should trust the lawyers and engineers to handle the details. But you couldn't stop thinking about it. No, especially after we started buying properties in this neighborhood. I drove through here a few times, saw the families, the kids playing in the yards. I started imagining what would happen to them when we tore everything down. Maya poured coffee for both of them. Did you ever talk to any of the residents? No, Bradley said it was better to keep our distance, to let the lawyers handle all the negotiations, but I wanted to. I especially wanted to meet your grandmother. Why? Because she was the only one who said no to us. Everyone else took our money, but she refused. I was curious about what kind of person turns down a check that could set them up for life. Maya smiled sadly. She said this house wasn't for sale at any price. She said some things are worth more than money. She was right. She usually was. They sat in silence for a while, drinking their coffee and listening to the rain, which had slowed to a gentle patter. David, can I ask you something personal? After everything I've told you, I don't think there's anything too personal. What happened to your marriage? David looked surprised by the question. What makes you think it's connected to all this? Just a feeling. You seem like someone who's been running from something for a long time. David was quiet for a long moment. My ex-wife Jenny used to say I cared more about making money than about anything else, including her. Was she right? Probably. I told myself I was working hard for our future, for the family we might have someday. But really I was just scared of not having enough. Enough for what? Enough to feel safe? Enough to feel like I mattered. Enough to prove to myself that I wasn't that poor kid anymore. Maya felt a pang of sympathy for him. Is that why you got into development? I thought it was about building things, creating something lasting. But somewhere along the way, it became about the money. About winning. And your wife got tired of coming in second to your bank account. She got tired of being married to someone who was never really present. Even when I was home, I was thinking about the next deal, the next project. Jenny used to say I was so busy building other people's dreams that I forgot about our own. Maya could picture it. David, driven by fear and ambition, working longer and longer hours, chasing bigger and bigger deals until he lost everything that actually mattered. Do you miss her? Every day, but not just her. I miss who I used to be before I became so obsessed with success. Who were you before? David smiled. And for the first time since Maya had met him, it looked genuine. I was a guy who wanted to be an architect. I wanted to design buildings that would make people happy. Schools, libraries, community centers. I had this crazy idea that I could help make the world a little better. What happened to that guy? He got scared. He decided that making money was more important than making a difference. Maya looked at David with new eyes. She was starting to understand that the man who developed her neighborhood wasn't evil. He was just human with all the fears and flaws that came with that. David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay, if you could go back and do things differently, would you? David didn't hesitate. Yes, absolutely. Even if it meant losing all the money? Especially if it meant losing all the money. Maya, I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, but I haven't been truly happy in years. I've been successful, but I haven't been good. And now? Now I want to find a way to be good again. I just don't know how. Maya stood up and walked to the window. The water was noticeably lower now. She could see the tops of cars that had been completely submerged the night before. The flooding is going to happen again, she said. Probably. Climate change is making storms more intense, and our development project made the drainage problems worse. So what are you going to do about it? David joined her at the window. I've been thinking about that all night. I have some ideas, but they're going to cost me everything. Tell me. I could withdraw from the development project, sell my shares back to Bradley, even at a loss, use the money to buy back the properties we've already purchased and sell them back to the original owners at the prices we paid. That would help some people, but it wouldn't fix the drainage problems. No, for that I'd need to do more. I'd need to fund a complete restoration of the wetlands we destroyed. Maybe even buy additional properties to expand the floodplain. Maya turned to look at him. That really would cost you everything, pretty much. I'd have to sell my house, my cars, most of my investments. I'd end up middle class, maybe even poor again. And that scares you, terrifies me, David admitted. But not as much as the thought of more floods, more families losing their homes because of something I did. Maya felt something shift inside her. The anger she'd been holding on to was being replaced by something else. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. David, I believe you want to make things right. But wanting isn't enough. People in this neighborhood need to know that someone is going to take responsibility for what happened. I know. I've been thinking about that too. What do you mean? I think I need to tell the truth. All of it, to the media, to the lawyers, to the families whose homes were damaged. I need to admit what we did and take responsibility for it. Maya stared at him. You know, that could mean criminal charges. I know. But I also know that hiding the truth hasn't made me feel any better. Maybe it's time to stop running from what I've done. Your business partner won't like that. Bradley is going to hate it. He'll probably try to destroy me financially and legally, but I can't keep living with this secret. Maya sat back down. David, I have to ask you something. Are you only saying this because you feel guilty about me saving your life? Because you don't owe me anything for that. David looked at her seriously. Meiyao, meeting you didn't create my guilt. I've been carrying this guilt for months. But meeting you, seeing how you live, hearing about your grandmother, it's shown me that there's another way to live. A way that doesn't involve hurting people to get ahead. It's not easy living that way. I'm starting to understand that. But I think it might be worth it. Meiyao looked at David, this man who'd been a stranger 2 days ago, who turned out to be partially responsible for destroying her neighborhood, and who now seemed genuinely committed to making things right. If you're serious about this, she sighed, I might be able to help. How? I know people in this neighborhood. I know the families who've been affected. If you really want to make amends, you're going to need their trust. And you're going to need someone who can speak for them. 3 months had passed since the flood, and Meiyao was standing in her grandmother's old community garden watching a group of kids plant tomatoes. The garden had been damaged by the flooding, but the community had come together to rebuild it. Today they were adding new raised beds and a rain collection system. Miss Maya, look how big my plant is getting, called out 7-year-old Lucia, holding up a tiny tomato seedling. That's wonderful, Lucia. Your grandmother would be so proud of how well you're taking care of it. Maya smiled, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about David, who should be arriving any minute for the community meeting they'd planned. It would be his first time meeting with the neighborhood families since the flood, and Maya wasn't sure how it would go. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind. True to his word, David had gone public with the truth about his company's role in the flooding. The story had exploded across local and national news. Developer admits role in devastating flood had been the headline in the city paper. Bradley, David's business partner, had been furious. He tried to sue David for damaging the company and had attempted to distance himself from the environmental problems. But David had documentation of everything, including emails showing that Bradley had known about the risks and chosen to ignore them. The legal consequences had been swift and severe. The development project was shut down immediately. Multiple lawsuits were filed by flood victims. Government investigators launched a criminal inquiry. David's company was fined millions of dollars and forced to pay damages to affected families, but David hadn't tried to hide from any of it. He'd cooperated with every investigation, testified honestly in every hearing, and used his own money to hire lawyers for families who couldn't afford them. He'd also done something that shocked everyone. He'd sold everything he owned to fund the restoration work he'd promised Maya. Maya had watched it all unfold with a mixture of admiration and concern. David had lost his house, his cars, most of his investments. He'd moved into a small apartment downtown and taken a job with a nonprofit organization that worked on sustainable development projects. His salary was a fraction of what he used to make, but something had changed in David during those 3 months. The constant worry that Maya had seen in his eyes during the flood was gone. He seemed lighter, more at peace with himself. When Maya asked him about it, he'd said, I finally feel like I'm living my life instead of running from it. Now, as Maya watched the kids in the garden, she saw David walking up the path. He was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, a far cry from the expensive clothes he'd worn during his developer days. He was carrying a folder of papers and looked nervous. Hey, he said when he reached her. How are you feeling about today? Nervous, Maya admitted. Some of these families lost everything in the flood. They're not going to be easy to convince. I know. I don't expect them to forgive me. I just want them to hear what I have to say. Maya studied his face. Are you sure you're ready for this? As ready as I'll ever be. They walked toward the community center where about 40 people had gathered. Maya recognized most of them, families from the neighborhood, some who'd lived there for generations. She also saw some faces she didn't recognize, people who'd moved away after the flood and come back for this meeting. As they entered the room, the conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look at David. Maya could feel the tension in the air. Good evening, everyone, Maya said, stepping forward. Thank you all for coming. I know this isn't easy for any of us. She introduced David, though most people already knew who he was from the news coverage. David stepped forward, and Maya could see his hands shaking slightly. I want to start by saying I'm sorry, David began. I know that word doesn't undo the damage that was done, but I need you to know that I take full responsibility for my role in what happened to your neighborhood. An older man in the front row, Maya recognized him as Carlos, who'd lived on Riverside Drive for 30 years, stood up. Sorry doesn't fix my house, Carlos said, his voice sharp with anger. Sorry doesn't replace my wife's wedding photos. That got destroyed. Sorry doesn't give me back the $20,000 I spent on repairs. You're absolutely right, David said. Sorry isn't enough. That's why I'm here. David opened his folder and pulled out a stack of papers. These are checks, restitution payments for every family affected by the flood. The amount is based on documented damages plus additional compensation for pain and suffering. A murmur went through the room. Carlos looked suspicious. What's the catch? Do we have to sign something saying we won't sue you? No catch. No legal agreements. This money comes with no strings attached. You can still pursue additional legal action if you want to. A woman Maya knew as Mrs. Rodriguez raised her hand. Where is this money coming from? From the sale of my personal assets, David said. My house, my cars, my investment accounts, everything I own that wasn't essential. And your company? Asked another voice from the back. My company has been dissolved. The remaining assets are being used to fund wetland restoration and flood prevention measures. Maya watched the faces in the room. The anger was still there, but she could see curiosity too. That's all well and good, said Carlos, but money doesn't fix everything. What about the next flood? What about protecting our neighborhood in the future? David nodded. That's the other reason I'm here. He pulled out a larger document. This is a comprehensive flood prevention plan developed by environmental engineers and approved by the city. It includes restoring the natural wetlands that were destroyed, building new flood barriers, and improving the drainage system throughout the area. Who's paying for all that? Mrs. Rodriguez asked. A combination of sources. Some funding from the government, some from insurance settlements, and the rest from a foundation I've established using the remaining money from my business. A younger man Maya didn't recognize stood up. Why should we trust you? You already lied to us once. It was a fair question, and Maya could see David struggling with how to answer it. You shouldn't trust me, David said finally. At least not based on my words. I lost the right to ask for trust when I put profit ahead of people's safety. But I'm hoping that over time my actions will speak louder than my words. What do you mean? The young man asked. I mean, I'm not going anywhere. I've taken a job with Riverside Community Development, a nonprofit that works on affordable housing and environmental protection. I'll be working in this neighborhood with these families for the foreseeable future. Maya felt a surge of surprise. David hadn't told her about this. You're going to be living here? Carlos asked. I've rented an apartment 2 blocks from here. I want to be part of this community, not someone who swoops in from the outside to fix things and then disappears. An elderly woman Maya knew as Grandmother Rose, everyone called her that, spoke up from her wheelchair near the front. Young man, why are you really doing this? You could have just paid the lawsuits and moved on with your life. David looked at her for a long moment. Because I realized that the person I'd become wasn't someone I liked very much. I was so focused on making money that I forgot why money matters in the first place. It's supposed to help people live better lives, not destroy their homes and communities. And you think giving away your money will make you a better person? Grandmother Rose asked. No, ma'am. I think learning to live like a human being instead of a profit machine will make me a better person. The money is just the first step. Maya watched as Grandmother Rose studied David's face. She was the unofficial elder of the neighborhood, and her opinion carried a lot of weight. Maya, Grandmother Rose said, turning to her, what do you think of all this? All eyes turned to Maya. She felt the weight of the moment. These people trusted her judgment, and what she said could determine how they received David's offer. 3 months ago, I saved a stranger from drowning, Maya said. I thought I was just helping someone in trouble. I had no idea that stranger was partially responsible for the flood that nearly destroyed our neighborhood. She paused, looking around the room at the faces of her neighbors. I was angry when I found out the truth. Angrier than I'd ever been in my life, but I've spent these past 3 months watching David try to make things right. Not just with money, but with his choices, his actions, his whole life. Maya looked at David. I've seen him testify against his own business interests. I've seen him give up everything he owned to pay for damages. And I've seen him change from someone who cared only about profit into someone who cares about people. She turned back to the room. That doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't undo the damage. But it does show that people can change, and that sometimes the person who causes a problem can become part of the solution. So you trust him? Carlos asked. I trust that he's trying to do the right thing now. And I think we should give him the chance to prove himself. Grandmother Rose nodded slowly. Maya's grandmother was a wise woman who raised a wise granddaughter. If Maya thinks this young man deserves a second chance, then I'm willing to listen. The mood in the room began to shift. People started asking practical questions about the flood prevention plan, about the restitution payments, about David's role in the neighborhood going forward.